Good morning and welcome to the Leadership and Insurance Podcast. I'm your host, Alex Bond, and I'm very lucky today to be joined by Oghenetega, who is CEO and founder of Figorr. Good morning, sir. How are you?
Morning, Alex. I'm very well. How are you?
Yeah, very good, very good. And we were just saying is that normally we've had a lot of preamble. Normally we've kind of spoken, but you've been dealing with my colleague Sophie, and this is the first time we speak. So I've already apologized ahead of time for asking you stupid questions because I'm excited for this conversation, as I said, because this is a little bit outside of our kind of like comfort zone. It's in that sort of insurtech adjacent space. So I'm really excited to have this conversation. But before I go into that, and let's give everyone some context. So it'd be really good, as tradition on the Leadership Insurance podcast, if you could kindly introduce yourself and the Figure business.
Yeah. Thanks, Alex. Excited to be here. So my name is Tega. The full name is Oghenetega Iortim. I know it's difficult to pronounce. And I lead the business called Figorr. Figorr traditionally has been in the space of temperature monitoring for perishable products, products such as, cut flowers, vaccines, meat, mushrooms, and so on and so forth. But one of the key opportunities that we've identified by doing this business has been that on the African continent, there's the absence of coverage for such perishable commodities. And as a company that has been providing data, we've been able to, through this data, sort of understand risky versus non-risky customers rather than using a broad market understanding to underwrite. So we have, started to help the insurance companies using our data to help them, segment between the customers that we deem risky or that the data deems risky versus the ones that are not. So in a nutshell, we provide real-time monitoring, but on the back of that, help with the data that ensures customers access insurance while also ensuring that the insurance companies are underwriting properly, right?
Amazing. Thank you for that. It's an interesting area. Funny enough, we were in the Lloyd's lab yesterday for their launch of cohort 11 and data richness and data enrichment, better use of data was a sort of large theme outside of one of their kind of traditional themes, but particularly looking at different geographies where the data's not quite as rich. Um, is that an element to it that's unique? Is particularly the geographies in which you're operating? Is there kind of was there a limited pool of data prior to you starting the business?
Yeah. Initially, when we started the business, this was not where we were thinking we were going to go. But yeah, one of the things that echoed a lot from a number of the customers was their inability to just get access to insurance because they were dealing in perishable goods. If you're familiar with a number of the policies written on the African continent, there's something which we call the standard exclusions, right? Those exclusions tend to refer to goods in transit that are perishable, anything that can self-deteriorate, which limits the ability for a number of businesses to get coverage in cases of losses. And yes, speaking to the insurance companies, we discovered that yes, a lot of the insurance companies were basing their theory on the fact that, look, Africa loses almost 50% of the food that they produce, which are perishable goods. The standard data that is accessible, via Google or any research paper. But what they were not able to do was to differentiate between the way Alex was doing business from the way Tega was doing business. I think is a very key element here. So with our data, we're able to differentiate between how the both, businesses are doing, how they're storing products, right? Which, now helps the insurance companies look into the historicals of this business and then can from there take the risk as regards, how they should underwrite a particular customer, not just using that broad market data, but using specific data that are unique to particular customers.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean it's exactly that kind of trend that we're seeing in the broader market is evaluating risks on a genuine basis. Like, there are good risks and bad risks that on the outside look exactly the same. If we both run, like, as you say, that example, the shipping company, and you run a really good one and I run a really bad one, then my loss ratio is going to be a lot higher. So and that's an oversimplification of it, but it's frustrating. I think particularly in the insurance market when we still see some of these blanket coverage policies, which makes sense from an insurance point of view, but they're not practically that useful for people that try and access insurance, particularly on to cover their business losses. But I think we sort of skipped ahead a little bit to a certain extent, or I skipped ahead because there's I'm asking the questions, so it's my fault. But I want to take it back because you've got a really interesting starting point. Because am I right in thinking it was solar powered cold storage? That's where the business begins. Talk us through that kind of journey. So you're moving to sort of selling this data. How deliberate was that journey as well? Because I'm always interested when businesses pivot. It's like how much is that you stumble upon something, it was a good idea, or it was a deliberate move. Yeah, talk us through that. It'd be great.
Yeah, I think as an entrepreneur, when you're going into a new business, you have everything worked out and seems very fantastic. And then you get in, and then the market says, no, this is not this is not how things work. And I think my journey has been similar to that, right? We started off largely because I had experienced some huge losses in the agricultural sector. And so I thought, hey, it would be cool to kind of build infrastructure that could help farmers store the products. But a lot of realities, on paper, it's a fantastic idea. There's a lot of impact as well. But in reality, you now have to start dealing with human beings, right? Their perception of your technology. Can they truly afford it? What's your capex cost? What's your opex cost? Once you start looking at those numbers, you realize that, okay, in the next 12 months, I'm going to be dead. So you have to, look at other opportunities there. And so that's what we did. So at first we attempted building that infrastructure, and we saw that at that point, we did not have enough capital to, grow out the business the way we would have loved to. So we made a pivot into just providing monitoring as a service for a number of customers, and we were largely successful with that. Year on year, we grew, 5x. But then you get to a point where you now start asking what next as an entrepreneur, right? And looking into it, always talking to customers. That I think that's probably like the best part of business for me, talking to customers and understanding what's really hurtful to them. And so talking to customers, realize that there's an opportunity here around coverage, because a lot of them do not have access to insurance coverage. And so speaking to the insurance companies, speaking to the customers, understanding what the problem was, and realizing that, look, this data that we've built over the past 2-3 years could help my customer have access to insurance, which means that when losses happen, my customers are covered, right? This also builds stickiness into the core of the business, which is monitoring. And so that's kind of how we kind of just moved all the way to where we are today. But the core of it is still the monitoring bit, but using that data to now help the insurance companies underwrite and help my customers not left hanging in cases of losses.
Yeah, I love that entrepreneurial journey, is the sort of looking ahead and you think you've got it right. And I had a really good conversation with Tim, who's CEO of Instando, and I think any entrepreneur has to have that sort of almost blind level of belief, otherwise you wouldn't do anything. It's too hard. But then the ability to pivot is also a part of that as well. It's just going, oh no, I'm wrong, and or sometimes you're right, but it's just the timeline to be right. It sounds like there's no point running out of money because you're still wrong. It's like the whole thing, being too early is as bad as being too late. Is there a world in which that, because was it patented technology? Was it unique technology that you'd built for this cold storage? Is there a world down the line where that still becomes part of the business, do you think?
Um, no, it wasn't patented technology. I think it's a lot of technology. It was more about adopting a technology for a particular use case. In terms of could it be part of the business? I think, on that entrepreneurial journey as well, you realize that, for your EBITDA to, get positive, you want to be as asset light as possible. So you start to look at, okay, how can I aggregate this rather than owning this and so on and so forth. I think the problem still exists, but we're also seeing a lot more investments coming into this space to fix some of those problems. So yes, we still have something in mind, but rather than building infrastructure, we're thinking about aggregating infrastructure. So yes, that could also be some value. And then you still use the value of, insurance. We can still layer that into an aggregated infrastructure play, as well as also aggregating monitoring into that infrastructure play as well. So rather than owning the infrastructure, in this case, we'll mostly be doing an aggregation and then adding the value of monitoring as well as access to the insurance into the solution. So not the way we envisioned it in day one, but we're looking at it in a different way.
Yeah, yeah. Awesome. I suppose it's what is it, the biggest hotel chain in the world doesn't own any hotels, and that being the theme of the businesses that are seeing success now. How far do you think you'll pursue insurance as a vertical? Because there's an argument to say that you could offer an MGA, you could offer your own insurance products. Is that something you've explored or thought about?
Yeah, yeah. Once we doubled into the insurance space, we realized that there's a lot of value that we can actually provide. But I think data is still the core, right? And yes, we're doing a number of really interesting stuff with a few insurance companies on the continent right now. One which I could mention is with a company called Royal Exchange. It's an insurance company in Nigeria. We're building something called the Poultry Index. There's a direct, you know, um, relationship between, climate as well as temperatures to the production levels for poultry birds, either layers or broilers. To put this in context, in Nigeria, this is a market that is valued about $4.2 billion, right? But there's limited coverage as well for this because it's a very, very risky space. And so, this is something that we're also doing, but again, data is still key. So I think data will still be the core, and we will still be able to kind of build out new products on the insurance side in partnership with the insurance companies. So yeah, there's a lot that we think we can do with the insurance space, and it's an entrepreneurship journey, which means that you keep growing, you keep learning, and you keep building new stuff to ensure that our customers have access to better service, right? Because we do currently provide monitoring for poultry businesses, poultry houses across the country. And if they could have access to better priced insurance premiums or better insurance products that covers their losses, then it's something that we're always going to do to ensure our customers have access to, better service.
Sure. Speaking about the kind of partnerships and insurers that you're working with, obviously you mentioned World Exchange, Nigerian-based insurer. What's been the partnership like on the kind of an international basis of the international insurance industry shown interest? Have you kind of had any engagements outside of the Nigerian market?
Yeah, so two markets we're really keen on is Nigeria, Kenya. Nigeria largely because that's where we started building out the product, and it's like sort of like the primary market. Kenya because it's also a regional play for the East African market, and there's a lot of exports that tends to happen from there. Right now, I think we have partnerships with about 7 insurance companies across the two markets. So yeah, it's been receptive, and it's been interesting because people have tried to figure out how do we ensure that we're capturing some of the opportunities that we've been foregoing, because on the side of the insurance companies, you have to realize that they also consider this as missed opportunities, right? And if there are ways that they can underwrite in a term that I saw somewhere, insure profitably, right? That was the term I saw somewhere. If they can insure profitably, then it means that they will go ahead and do it. So, but the key thing is the data, which is where Figorr sits. So yes, there's a lot of positive reception to it.
Yeah, it's like echoing back to that the talks I was at yesterday, and one of the challenges for insurance is that how they've traditionally kind of used data is to use claims data, But if you've not underwritten anything in Africa, then you haven't got any claims data to go on. So it's always that search for data and data that you can use in a predictive, modeling way. So it's really interesting to see how that kind of market grows, because obviously it's an enormous market. So to not be insuring or insuring profitably out there, then it's a huge missed opportunity. So I think it's exciting to be able to present some of that data on some of the market sizes you're talking about, 4.2 billion in the poultry market alone. I wanted to understand if anyone, because anytime we look at data now, parametric has been the kind of conversation point for about 6 months now. Is the data of a level now that people are utilizing parametrics? Has that been discussed? Has anyone looked at using your data in that way?
Yeah, so this particular product, which I'm talking about, the poultry index product, is largely parametric, double trigger incidents, right? Where we use climatic factors and sensor data as well. So that's one scenarios. I think parametric is the way the world is going, and it's inevitable. Our market may be slower, but it eventually would have to catch up, because we're seeing, even in other African markets, we're seeing global players offering parametric products right now on the African continent. So I think it's also, we're going to see a lot of local players adopting this subsequently. But yeah, the current product that we're working on with Royal Exchange is a parametric product. And we think it's going to, grow massively. I think if you also look at the crop insurance to a large extent is also parametric, and that is widely adopted across Africa, if I'm not mistaken. But I know in Nigeria, you do find that parametric applications for crop insurance.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, funnily enough, this conversation yesterday was about water agriculture and protecting like fishing stocks, for example, and it was being talked about in the way of using a parametric trigger, because it is so big in agriculture, because essentially if it fails or those goods perish, it's immediately the loss is there. There's no analysis really needed. Once the trigger's been hit, the food's been spoiled, then the payout should happen. But I'm slightly boringly obsessed with parametrics, because it was a thing that, I don't know, probably 3 years ago, if you'd asked me, I probably wouldn't have known what it was. And I know, just as a small business owner, just selfishly, I look at it and go, if you could guarantee me a payout, I'd rather that, because as you know, as an entrepreneur, cash is king, and that's what's going to kill me. So as long as you can get me back in business again, whether it kind of fully covers it or whether it just allows me to keep going, that's what matters. So hugely attractive, I think, as an insurance tool.
Yeah.
Um, I had a quite cynical question, so I hope and I hope it's not too cynical. But I was just thinking, has there been any resistance from customers on the level of like transparency that your monitoring provides? Because the end customer, do they want to know about the journey of their goods, that kind of, as it arrives? Is there kind of any resistance to that transparency that you go? Do people want to know what their food goes through to get them? I was just wondering if that's anything it's a bit like, the way I was thinking about it was that when people started putting like the black box on cars,
Yeah.
and people were like, I don't want my insurance company to know how I drive. Has that going to be any pushback at all?
No, funny enough. Sorry. Yeah, no, not at all. I think if you look at the value we're bringing to customers, I think that's the key thing. In especially developing countries where we have a lot of infrastructure failures, like electricity and so on and so forth, the value first goes to the customer, right? So just understanding how my facility is performing can determine if I lose products or not, right? Which means that my capital is either safe or it's gone, right? So that is the first value that we bring to the customer, meaning that my things are safe, my things are good, I'm still in business. I'm not going to wake up tomorrow and be shocked that all the products I had here, is gone. So that's the first value. So providing that value to the customer is already a benefit. So they don't have a challenge. They want that transparency in their operations because we also do have personnel issues, which means that you have drivers not going where they're supposed to go when they're transporting really temperature sensitive products. So yes, you want to pay attention to where your driver is going per time. People, and like I said, infrastructure failures. So you want to know when, the grade has gone down in your particular cold room, therefore, so that you can take the necessary steps to ensure that those products are safe. So that visibility is necessary for ensuring the survival of their business in the first instance, before the next step, which is, how do I access insurance, and things like that. And even before an insurance company gets access to your data, you have to give approval for that data to be shared with the insurance companies for underwriting purposes. So yeah, the first value goes to the customer. So it's beneficial to them.
Yeah, and I suppose any customers that think the cynical way that I was thinking just wouldn't engage with the product full stop. So yeah, there's a reason I don't have a black box on my car. My driving's too dodgy to be monitored, I think. The I wanted to wonder how products like yours and services like yours, data has an impact on climate change. Is that something that's come up at all in any of the thought process? Because presumably the transportation of goods is a huge polluting source, but if you can do that more efficiently because you can monitor it and what's perishing and what's not, should have a positive impact on climate change, one would imagine. But I didn't know if that's something that's been kind of discussed by customers or maybe even investors.
Yeah. So data, I think, is one of those key things that has an impact on climate change. Sometimes very difficult to quantify, but it does. So when you talk about things like route optimization, you talk about overcooling from a cold chain perspective as well. Those are some of the impacts that data can tell you. Are you overcooling? Are you overheating? Are you taking a longer route? Are you doing this efficiently and non-efficiently? And it's also one of those points where you find value being delivered immediately. And I'll explain. If your driver is taking a 15-kilometer road to deliver products when he could take 7, right? There's instant value in terms of how much you save in gasoline. And there's also the impact on the environment, right? When you talk about overcooling, you also talk about, is your compressor overworking, right? When you need to store temperatures at so and so value. And if your compressors are overworking, then it means that there's also the release of, greenhouse gases. So with the knowledge and with data, you can actually position in such a way that it saves you money, but also has a positive impact on the environment. So that's one. But another thing is, and I'll still talk back to on the poultry index products which we're working on. There's also been the chat around how the environment or global warming is affecting food productivity on the African continent, because Africa is one of those continents that is directly impacted by the rise in temperatures. It's a normally a hot region, and so we've seen that. So what we're doing with that product is understanding the climatic factors, looking at data over the last 30 years, how it's affecting poultry production, and with every increase in temperature, we're going to actually see that birds are going to produce less. Right, they're going to feed less, and when they feed less, then it means less growth. Also, in terms of layers as well, we're going to see that the egg productions are also going to decline as well. Right, so we're using those factors to kind of also help insurance companies to understand how the risk, how risky it is to underwrite. So those are some of the things that our data is helping with, beyond just saving the planet. Is also talking about the impact of some of the climatic factors on production in some birds.
Yeah, I think your first point particularly really resonates with me, because we've talked about using insurance to sort of drive positive movements towards climate change and addressing climate change, and some have been that quite directly with insurance products, and others is just about kind of using data. But the thing that we've always come back to is that it needs to be it needs to be profitable, positive moves. So, that's the thing. Like you going back to more efficient routes, exactly that, like save money and, save the planet. And I think too much of the kind of, talk around it has just been save the planet, but not in a way that addresses the needs of businesses. And whilst that might be, there's a lot of people out there who say, well, that's the priority is to saving the planet first. And yeah, we would probably all agree, but it's just like that doesn't take into account the realities of businesses, and businesses need to make money. So if you can give someone, oh, that you're more profitable and you're contributing positively to climate change issues, then that's just a win-win all round. So the kind of more initiatives you see like yours is exciting to see. Um, I wanted to just ask you as well about kind of vaccine transportation, because obviously they would fall into kind of perishable elements.
Yeah.
Is that some of the data, have people monitored for that, and did that have a positive impact at all on maybe the fundraising process? I'm more thinking about, it became much more awareness of the issue of going, like, vaccines were failing because they were not being transported correctly. Is that something that's kind of ever factored into the conversations of some of the monitoring you've done?
Yeah, so we've done a lot of projects around vaccines, especially in my home country, which is Nigeria. We did that a lot, during COVID. After COVID, it's been extended beyond just COVID now to routine immunizations, ensuring its efficacy at the last mile. But yes, it was one of those things that helped people notice, right? I had family members who told me, Tega, I never knew what you did until COVID happened, right? Because the value was much more in their faces, right? But that being said, we were also serving at the same time a bunch of other, customers in multiple sectors. Right now, we're doing a lot in the cut flower industry in Kenya, the mushrooms, avocados, and so on and so forth. But yes, being able to showcase the failure rates, as well as how to basically just improve the success rates as well, was also another project which I was really, really excited to do, because it had a direct impact on people's lives, right? So we were able to, put in sensors into different boxes before the pack and before the ship. We're able to tell what the storage conditions are. If there were particular issues when products landed in a particular airport, then we could make decisions as regards distribution. And these were things that, initially organizations used to run blind, right? So with this, we were able to help provide data that made certain decisions quicker, right? I'll give you a particular instance. There was one time when they were shipping vaccines, what used to happen is they would look into the historicals of a particular state, and they would say this state over the next 30 days would be only able to consume, say, for example, 1 million doses of this vaccine, right? But in cases where, there are delays or, exposures, it means that those vaccines have to be consumed over a shorter period of time. So there was a particular incident where we shipped products to one of the states, and then there was an issue. So being able to provide them with that information meant that, okay, rather than us distributing these vaccines, which has been allocated for 1 month period for this state, we need to break that bulk and distribute it into closer states, right? So that the consumption period is, much shorter. And so we don't also incur huge amount of losses because when you marry the the consumption patterns with amount that's available, it will waste. So being able to provide that data was also very instrumental to ensuring that losses were minimal during that period. And now we're still doing the same thing across other states for routine immunization, the one given to kids, and families, and so on and so forth.
Mm. And it's another tool in which insurers can use your data and monitoring services, right? Because it's a bit like flood modeling that would happen. Is that one of the things is getting ahead of it and being proactive and saying, right, there's a flood risk, raise everything a foot off the ground, and then we'll probably be fine. You're able to give that real time, saying there's an insured risk. And actually, if we change the route or if we change the distribution pattern, that claim will not occur. So yeah, really interesting to see how these are multiple ways that you could use, like for underwriting purposes, for risk managing purposes, and for kind of loss prevention purposes as well. All just within the insurance vertical.
Yeah.
Amazing. I wanted to probably like probably my final question. I don't want to keep you too long. But you successfully raised earlier this year. I think it was May, it's about $2 million. And then you've had multiple grants for investing in Innovation Africa, Google for startups. What's the startup community like in Nigeria? Is it kind of particularly active? Because I've seen quite a lot of press about it, but obviously I've only got the narrow lens of insurtech, so if it doesn't hit insurtech, I don't have as much exposure. So, you're an entrepreneur, and I wonder what's the community like there for startups?
And Alex, it's huge. I've had folks visit Nigeria and they're like, I mean, what's going on here? Because there's a lot happening. And it's largely, I would also liken it to the spirit of Nigerians in general, right? Really innovative people. Unfortunately, we've not had great leaders in terms of governance. And so we kind of grew up in an environment where you don't have water, you have to figure out how to drill a borehole and ensure you have water. You don't have electricity, you have to go and build a generator or find something to get yourself electricity. You don't have food, then go find a way to get it. So we've had to innovate across a broad number of challenges, right? And so that has driven people to, when you find a problem, you try and solve it, and you try and solve it profitably. And so this is one of the key reasons why I think Nigeria is one of the growing hubs for technology. And so yeah, it's a big space. I hope you eventually come to visit one of these days. But yeah, there's a lot of businesses in the insurtech space, in the health tech space, in the agri-tech space, retail. There are a lot of businesses actually, technology businesses that are springing up, looking to solve key fundamental issues on the continent. But yeah, it's a very vibrant space, and hopefully one day you would come to visit and you can experience it for yourself.
I'd love to. I'll take that as an invite, Tega, and I'll go out there. But I'll have to fight Sophie for it because Sophie grew up in Africa. She grew up in Malawi, so she's always desperately trying to go back. So I'd have to probably fight for the seat on the plane if there's only one of us there. So yeah, but look, I always like to finish on kind of what's next, really. So I know obviously you're working on this poultry index, and that's probably occupying a lot of your time, but what's the kind of next 12 months look like for the business? Is there kind of any things that you can share about kind of maybe geographic expansion or kind of new product launches that we haven't already covered off?
Yeah, I think what's happening, and my plans are usually informed by my trends or my experiences. What we're seeing right now, especially because we're doing a lot of business with the cut flower industry, we're seeing a lot of exports happening to the European market. And we're also, so over the next 12 months, my goal would be to learn more about the European space, and also see how I can bring more value to my customers, because I think that's the core thing. We see a lot of imports coming from Europe into Africa. We see a lot of exports happening from Africa into Europe from the eastern side, and then from the western side, we see from Europe into Africa. And so how does coverage look like? Because one of the major opportunities I've identified is a number of the foreign businesses, and I'll say European businesses that import into Africa, what tends to happen is coverage happens from port to port. But once it gets into the port and to the point of storage, there's a vacuum there. So is there a possibility to fill that gap? At what point do we need to intercept those sort of opportunities so that's what we would largely be focusing on in the next 12 months. After launching of the poultry index, we're hoping that there could be some expansion happening in the business, but solving this problem of imports. Once it gets to the port and goes in, and once it gets out and gets into the European market as well. So trying to figure that out. So that would be the next step for the business in over the next 12 months.
Amazing. I love it. There's so many gaps in, particularly when, I mean, we look at sort of supply chain and whether it's kind of perishable or non-perishable, that there's just so many gaps and opportunities in insurance. So it's really exciting to see businesses like yours addressing those gaps. Thank you so much for spending the time with me and being patient with some of my questions because I was like, it's always funny when I'm slightly outside my comfort zone. But yeah, I've really enjoyed this conversation. So, Tega, thanks so much for being a guest on the Leadership and Insurance podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much, Alex, for your time. It's a pleasure and really interesting questions.
Thank you.